In recent weeks, North Korea has been at the forefront of global news due to its growing alliance with Russia and a series of provocative missile tests. These actions have far-reaching implications for the global political landscape, particularly in light of the deepening divide between Western nations and parts of the global South. In this analysis, we'll dive into these issues, exploring North Korea's political evolution, its historical ties, recent military activity, and alliances. We'll consider how these elements shape North Korea's role in global geopolitics. Historical context: Soviet influence and the birth of North Korea. The roots of North Korea's modern political stance trace back to 1945, following World War II, when Korea was split along the 38th parallel by the Soviet Union in the north and the United States in the south. This division marked the beginning of Cold War tensions in the region. In the north, the Soviet Union installed Kim Il-sung, an anti-Japanese guerrilla leader, as the head of the new Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, in 1948. Kim implemented sweeping reforms, including the nationalization of industry and land redistribution, laying the foundation for a socialist state. He also championed yush, or self-reliance, a policy intended to decrease North Korea's dependency on Soviet resources. The Korean War, conflict and enduring hostility. In June 1950, North Korea launched an offensive against South Korea in a bid to unify the peninsula under communist rule. This conflict sparked a massive international response, with the United Nations, led by the US, backing South Korea, while China entered the war in support of North Korea. The fighting concluded in 1953 with an armistice, not a formal peace treaty, creating a highly militarized border at the 38th parallel and embedding a legacy of hostility, particularly toward the United States, which North Korea has consistently viewed as a primary threat to its sovereignty. Cold War alliances and nuclear ambitions. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, North Korea maintained close ties with China and the Soviet Union, although it was cautious not to become overly dependent on either ally. The Soviet Union provided military training and support, while Kim Il-sung sought a strategic balance by also aligning with China, especially during the Sino-Soviet split. However, the relationship between North Korea and its allies was not always smooth. For example, China's Cultural Revolution in the 1960s introduced significant ideological tensions between North Korea and its eastern neighbor. North Korea's commitment to self-sufficiency and reluctance to accept Soviet aid further distanced it from its allies, setting the stage for its nuclear ambitions, which began taking shape in the 1960s as a means of securing defense and leveraging its position in international relations. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, North Korea lost its principal economic backer, leading to widespread famine and economic hardship throughout the 1990s. This economic downturn accelerated North Korea's nuclear program, which it increasingly saw as essential to negotiating international aid and security assurances. Despite international sanctions and multiple rounds of diplomacy, such as the Six-Party Talks, 2003 to 2009, North Korea's nuclear program continued, cementing its role as a point of contention with the global community. Relations with the United States and South Korea. In recent decades, North Korea's relations with the US have oscillated between short periods of dialogue and protracted periods of tension. In the early 2000s, US President George W. Bush categorized North Korea as part of the axis of evil, which further fueled animosity. Under Kim Jong-un, North Korea's missile testing and nuclear advancements have prompted increased sanctions. Despite high-profile summits with former US President Donald Trump in 2018 and 2019, which momentarily suggested a path toward diplomacy, the denuclearization talks ultimately failed. North Korea's relationship with South Korea has similarly fluctuated, marked by moments of diplomatic outreach, overshadowed by frequent military provocations and missile tests. Modern strategic alignments with China and Russia. Today, North Korea's closest allies are China and Russia, who provide the country with much-needed economic and military support. China is North Korea's primary economic partner, sustaining the North Korean economy through trade, resources, and political support, despite tensions surrounding North Korea's nuclear ambitions. China views North Korea as a strategic buffer against US-aligned South Korea, but it is wary of Pyongyang's nuclear pursuits, which risk destabilizing the region. North Korea's relationship with Russia has grown notably stronger in recent years, especially given their mutual opposition to Western influence in Asia. Russia's support includes military aid and diplomatic backing, helping North Korea counterbalance the pressure from Western sanctions. This partnership is increasingly relevant as North Korea relies on both Russia and China amid growing isolation from much of the international community. Evolution of China-North Korea relations, from Cold War allies to pragmatic partners. The China-North Korea alliance has evolved significantly, transitioning from a solid Cold War partnership to a more nuanced and sometimes strained relationship today. China's military support during the Korean War cemented the alliance, formalized by the 1961 Sino-North Korean Mutual Aid and Cooperation Friendship Treaty. This treaty included a defense commitment, which China has periodically reaffirmed. During the Cold War, China provided essential economic and military assistance to North Korea, though the relationship was complicated by North Korea's desire for self-reliance. This desire for independence occasionally caused friction as North Korea distanced itself ideologically from Chinese and Soviet influences. The relationship was further tested when China opened diplomatic channels with the US in the 1970s, which Pyongyang viewed with suspicion. After the Soviet Union's collapse in the 1990s, North Korea became increasingly reliant on Chinese economic support, although Beijing's patience has occasionally waned, as North Korea's nuclear tests prompted international sanctions that China has had to balance diplomatically. Recent developments and rising military tensions. As of October 31, 2024, North Korea has reportedly launched yet another ballistic missile into the Sea of Japan. According to South Korea's Yonhap news agency and Japan's defense ministry, the missile appears to have been an intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, launched at a high angle. Japan's defense minister noted that the missile reached an altitude of over 7,000 kilometers and had a flight duration of 86 minutes, the longest recorded. If verified, this would mark North Korea's 12th missile test of the year, underscoring its determination to expand its military capabilities despite international objections. Japan's National Security Council held an emergency meeting in response to the launch. This ICBM test, which potentially signals new technological advancements, follows North Korea's December 2023 test of the Hwasong-18, a three-stage solid-fuel missile. Analysts are closely monitoring these developments as North Korea's missile technology improves, raising concerns about regional stability and global security. Reports of North Korean soldiers in Russia. In recent months, Unconfirmed reports have suggested that North Korean soldiers might be supporting Russian forces in the conflict with Ukraine. South Korean intelligence sources estimate that around 1,500 to 3,000 North Korean troops could be stationed in Russian military areas, possibly training for eventual deployment in Ukraine. The US and NATO allies have expressed concern over this potential development, as it would mark a new level of foreign involvement in the conflict. If true, North Korea's support for Russia could be motivated by strategic interests or even economic incentives, as Moscow may offer military technology in exchange. North Korea's large, disciplined military force could address Russia's manpower shortages, with North Korean troops potentially performing support roles or even engaging in combat. South Korea has indicated it may increase its support for Ukraine if North Korea's involvement in the conflict expands. NATO is monitoring the situation and has expressed concerns, although no direct policy changes have been announced. If confirmed, North Korean participation in the Ukraine conflict would have significant geopolitical consequences, potentially drawing in South Korea and heightening tensions with the West. Conclusion and reflection on future implications. The latest developments from North Korea highlight its increasingly prominent role in the broader geopolitical landscape, influenced by complex alliances, historical animosities, and strategic motivations. North Korea's closer ties with Russia and China, coupled with its continued military advancements, are reshaping security dynamics in East Asia and beyond. The potential involvement of North Korean troops in Ukraine, if verified, could signify an expanded commitment to supporting Russia against Western interests, further polarizing the international community. As North Korea pursues its agenda with limited regard for diplomatic pressures, the global community faces an unpredictable landscape. While responses from the US, Japan, and NATO have largely been limited to diplomatic protests, the possibility of escalating tensions cannot be dismissed. Amid such uncertainty, a cautious approach that prepares for multiple potential outcomes will be essential.